Right, so a new law just passed in Israel's Knesset appears to be a ramping up of their weaponisation of antisemitism when it comes to criticism of their country. They believe that Israel should be treated differently, and to not do so is to be a racist thing. It's a narrative we've seen play out for years now. They believe they should be held to a different set of rules because of the historic suffering of the Jewish people. And with a hardline right-wing Zionist government as they've had for the last 16 years, by and large under Benjamin Netanyahu. The targets of this new law, however, are not Gazans or Palestinians generally, though, but actually anyone from anywhere else in the world who is critical of what they've been up to, frankly, since the Nakba in 1948, but of course very much now as their actions have been more exposed and brought into sharp focus against a backdrop of over 11,000 deaths in Gaza. The settler mentality, the apartheid, the keeping of Gazans in an open-air prison, the targeting of civilians. Israel is having a very hard job in its pursuit of still playing the victim, and accusations of racism, if you don't agree with them, are falling on deaf ears more and more. So this new law is designed not to designate potentially anybody being critical of Israel as racist anymore. No, they will now be looking to designate anyone criticising them as a terrorist. So that's anyone calling them out for what they're doing, and you can point to a whole host of people globally that this might apply to. But to carry weight, it has to be people of prominence to get it going, to be accused of such a thing first of all. They're the sort of people that they're going to be going for with this. And in this country, we have one very obvious target in Jeremy Corbyn, who is advocating for a ceasefire now, as he has done for years. Not just because violence has ramped up all of a sudden now since October, but he's been doing it for years and years and years now. And because he's still living rent-free in the heads of so many pro-Israel individuals as he does, is he an obvious target for this new law to be deployed against? Right, so Israel's new law is frankly ridiculous and is basically putting their right to claim victimhood, as it were, on their own statute books, even as they seemingly level Gaza block by block. Instead of relying on anti-Semitism to hide behind, because it's not getting through like it used to anymore, is it? They're now going to accuse those criticising them instead of being terrorists. Well, surely they can't just arbitrarily do that then, Damo, you might be thinking. Other states around the world will not stand for such slander against their own citizens, especially in countries that are known to be critical of the current regime. Well, there's plenty of other countries that have been acquiescing to Israel for decades. Many foreign politicians do it. Notably our own, are bought and paid for via donations, infiltrated as political organisations. You don't end up with a Zionist without qualification like Keir Starmer leading a major party and looking set to be the next Prime Minister by accident, because, of course, the pro-Israeli donors are the people that put him in that position. And you just look across at the Labour Party as a whole. Look at all the members of Labour Friends of Israel who, again, have accepted donations and hospitality from pro-Israeli sources. Look at the Labour National Executive Committee itself, with its member Luke Akers sat there, and he's a paid advocate for the State of Israel. And of course, our media are just as weak on the issue of Israel too. In fact, some can be downright abusive in their defence of that victim narrative that Israel seems to covet. Ultimately, if they want to have a law basically calling people in other countries' names, terrorists in this case, they can. It's the consequences of that that will matter. And that will certainly vary one country to another. But in this country, with our leaders, it's probably not going to be a good thing. The way Israel have done this, though, is by amending existing legislation. They haven't done anything particularly big or clever here. They've just taken their counter-terrorist laws, which previously stated that foreign nationals could only be designated terrorists if a qualified national entity had already made that assertion. If you were already regarded a terrorist by the UN, for example, then Israel could as well. The amendment simply removed that requirement. So they can now call any organisation or any individual they like a terrorist if they want to, based on whatever evidence they choose to come up with, so often fabricated as it's seemed to be in recent weeks. It does seem to be a dangerous thing to do, attacking other countries' citizens. By rights, you would expect a given nation to stand by their own people when accused, but this is Israel. We've got to remember who we're talking about here, and there's no guarantees about that with some countries. The US will be a prime example, probably the most vociferous ally Israel has, though we here in the UK will not be far behind. With the most pro-Israel Prime Minister ever, David Cameron, now the Foreign Secretary, he won't hesitate, especially when many of those in this country calling for a ceasefire, condemning Israel's indiscriminate bombing, singling out the most hard-right Israeli government in history, and you can imagine somebody like Jeremy Corbyn will be an obvious and popular first target for somebody like Dodgy Dave, likely with Keir Starmer joining in as well. When doesn't he support the Tories these days after all? But Corbyn, whoa, he wouldn't be able to resist that, would he? Dodgy Dave. But I'll come back to that in a moment. Netanyahu is only in power because he did a deal with the far right in his country. The Otzma Yehudit party being one, Jewish Power it stands for, where a hardline settler like Itamar Ben-Gvir is now in charge of national security. Or how about a maniac like Bezalel Smotrich, leader of the also far-right religious Zionist party, who is the defence minister? And it's worth paying a little bit of more attention to this guy in particular, since under the terms of this new law, it is Smotrich who will be designating who Israel deems to be a terrorist. It's the job of the defence minister. This is a guy, though, who was called Hamas an asset to Israel. The people who murdered over 1,000 of his own people on October the 7th, and he considers them useful to Israel's aims, and you can see why when it gives Israel the excuses they have done to commit genocide. The guy who will decide what constitutes terrorism is somebody who has said criminal damage or acts of vandalism against Palestinian property is not to be deemed terrorism. He supports apartheid even down to separate maternity wards in hospitals, excusing this by saying his wife would not want to lie down and give birth to a woman whose baby might want to murder her baby in 20 years' time. He's a charmer, isn't he? When Palestinians are armed with sticks and stones, they come up and they start resisting Israel. Smotrich has advocated a shoot-to-kill policy as a proportional response. I can go on. He is as nasty as you can get. This is who Netanyahu chose to get into bed with to stay in power. This is who is in charge of administering this new law, or the accusations thereof. You can imagine Corbyn, the diplomat, the man of peace, the man wanting a ceasefire, having his unfortunate past comments about Hamas used against him. The context always forgotten that he was advocating for peace then too. Clumsy language in hindsight was diplomacy then. But it'd be a bit rich for him to be designated a terrorist from what he has said about Hamas in the past, that he has apologised for and regrets, by a guy who considers Hamas an asset himself. Who can deny he'd be a prime target? The media are still fixated on him. It'd give Keir Starmer an excuse, arguably, to expel him completely. Who knows? Could even lead to his arrest, potentially, under terrorism laws if our government really want to bend over backwards in Israel's favour on this. It's not like our politicians have done anything except line up to say Israel has a right to do what it is doing. Who's to say they won't say the same when it comes to Brits being accused of being something they blatantly are not, when all they really want is a ceasefire and peace, which none of our mainstream politicians seem to believe in backing. Calling for a ceasefire, for peace in Palestine, for freedom for Palestine, saying from the river to the sea. We don't know how this country would react to Israeli accusations of terrorism of UK citizens in such contexts as those, but I can easily see Corbyn being one of the first they'd pick on. Then could it happen to any number of us simply for calling the same thing? Israel wouldn't just go changing their laws on this for no reason at all. They plan to do something with this. Well, I guess we'll have to wait and see just how far they take that. Thanks for watching. I hope you found this video useful. Please like, share and subscribe if you did. More content out daily. Meanwhile, here's a video recommendation where Corbyn got banned last week for being a peace activist from addressing the Rosa Luxemburg conference because the venue was pro-Israel too. I'll hopefully catch you on the next vid. Cheers, folks.